cocky black belt mocked Dean Martin at Dojo. What happened next left everyone speechless. A karate champion thought he was facing some random old guy from the audience. When the fight started, he realized he'd made the biggest mistake of his life and learned that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one who doesn't look dangerous at all. It was April 22, 1973, at the West Hollywood Martial Arts Academy on Melrose Avenue. Dean Martin had been quietly training in martial arts for over 8 years, and Sensei Takeshi Yamamoto had been his primary instructor since 1967. Dean had earned his first-degree black belt in 1969, and had continued training intensively ever since, eventually earning fourth-degree black belt status. But most people didn't know this about Dean. They knew him as the king of cool, the smooth entertainer, the member of the Rat Pack who made everything look effortless. They didn't know about the hundreds of hours he'd spent perfecting kata forms, mastering striking techniques, and studying the discipline and philosophy behind martial arts. They certainly didn't know that Dean had started training not for physical fitness or self-defense, but because he'd been fascinated by the mental discipline required to master both body and mind simultaneously. On this particular Saturday afternoon, Dean decided to visit Sensei Yamamoto's dojo unannounced. He wasn't there for a private lesson. He just wanted to watch a regular class, to observe the students, to remember what it felt like to be a beginner filled with enthusiasm and determination. Dean dressed simply, plain black G-pants, a dark blue t-shirt, and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He wore sunglasses even though he was indoors. At 55 years old, Dean had maintained his lean build better than most men his age, but his face showed the lines of someone who had lived fully and enjoyed life's pleasures. Between the casual clothes, the relaxed posture, and the sunglasses, he was virtually unrecognizable as one of America's biggest entertainers. He slipped into the dojo quietly and sat on a wooden bench at the back of the training area, away from the main floor. A Saturday afternoon class was in session. About 18 students ranging from white belts to advanced brown belts, all practicing their forms under the watchful eye of one of Sensei Yamamoto's senior instructors. Among the students was a young man named Brad Morrison. Brad was 26 years old, powerfully built, and extremely talented. He'd been training for 7 years and had just earned his second-degree black belt. He'd also recently won a major regional karate tournament, which had inflated his ego considerably. Brad was the kind of martial artist who had forgotten the core principle of humility that should guide all serious practitioners. He was skilled, undeniably, but he'd started to believe his own publicity. He'd begun talking down to lower-ranked students, showing off unnecessarily during demonstrations, and treating the dojo like his personal showcase rather than a place of learning and mutual respect. Sensei Yamamoto had noticed this attitude shift and had been deeply concerned about it. But he believed in letting students learn certain lessons through experience rather than lectures. Sometimes the best teacher was reality, not words. The class was working on kumite, controlled sparring practice. Students were paired up according to rank and skill level, working through various combat scenarios designed to test technique, timing, and control. Brad was dominating his sparring partner, an advanced brown belt who was clearly outmatched in both skill and confidence. After defeating his partner easily for the 4th time, Brad looked around the dojo with obvious boredom and superiority. His eyes landed on Dean, sitting quietly in the back, appearing to be just another middle-aged spectator. "Hey!" Brad called out, his voice carrying across the entire dojo with unnecessary volume. "You there, old-timer in the back!" Dean looked up from watching the other students, pointing to himself with a questioning gesture. "Yeah, you," Brad said with a cocky grin that made several students exchange uncomfortable glances. "You here to watch or you here to train? Because if you're going to take up space in a serious dojo, you might as well get on the mat and learn something." A few students laughed nervously, more out of discomfort than amusement. Others looked genuinely embarrassed by their classmates' behavior. The senior instructor, sensing trouble brewing, started to intervene. "Brad, that's inappropriate behavior. Please return to your—" "Come on, Sensei," Brad interrupted with the kind of casual disrespect that made everyone in the room cringe. "We always say the dojo is open to everyone, right? Let's see what the old guy's got. Maybe he wants to learn from a real champion." Dean remained seated, his expression unreadable behind his sunglasses. He could have revealed who he was right then. He could have stood up, removed his sunglasses, and watched Brad's face crumble with embarrassment and recognition. But something made him hesitate. Maybe it was because he remembered being young and overconfident himself, back when he thought charm and natural ability were enough to carry him through anything. Maybe it was because he recognized that Brad needed to learn a lesson that only experience could teach. Or maybe Dean was simply curious to see how far the young man's arrogance would carry him. "I'm just here to observe," Dean said quietly, his voice deliberately soft and unassuming. "Observing won't make you any younger or any stronger," Brad shot back with the kind of smug confidence that comes from too much success too early. "But I'll tell you what, I'll go easy on you. Just one round. Show these students that age is just a number, right?" The senior instructor looked absolutely mortified. "Brad, that's enough. Apologize to our guest and return to your training immediately." "It's okay," Dean said, standing up slowly with the unhurried movement of someone who had all the time in the world. "One round won't hurt anything." Brad's grin widened with anticipation. He was already imagining how this would play out. Him gently but firmly defeating this older gentleman, looking magnanimous in victory, impressing everyone with his control and superior skill. Dean removed his baseball cap and sunglasses, setting them carefully on the bench. A few of the more observant students in the back of the class gasped quietly. They had recognized him, but Brad was too focused on stretching and showing off his flexibility to notice the change in atmosphere. Dean walked onto the mat with movements that were unhurried and seemingly casual. To Brad, he looked like exactly what he had assumed, an out-of-shape older man who was about to receive a gentle but firm lesson in respecting the younger generation. The senior instructor looked deeply uncomfortable but decided to allow the match to proceed. He knew who Dean was, and he suspected this was about to become a teaching moment, though not the kind Brad was expecting. "Standard Kumite rules," the instructor announced reluctantly. "Controlled contact only. First to 3 points or submission. Bow to each other with respect." Brad bowed with exaggerated ceremony, barely hiding his condescending smirk. Dean bowed properly, deeply, with genuine respect for the tradition and the art form. "Ready?" the instructor asked, hoping this wouldn't end in embarrassment for their famous guest. Both fighters assumed their fighting stances. Brad's stance was perfect textbook form, the stance of someone who had spent years drilling the fundamentals until they became second nature. But there was tension in it, a rigidity that came from ego rather than true discipline. Dean's stance was completely different. It was relaxed, almost casual, but there was something about it that made the more experienced students in the class lean forward with sudden interest. It was the stance of someone who didn't need to prove anything to anyone, someone who had moved beyond technique into true understanding. "Begin." Brad moved first, launching a fast but predictable roundhouse kick aimed at Dean's midsection. It was a testing strike, meant to gauge his opponent's reaction time and defensive capabilities. Dean didn't block the kick, he simply wasn't there when it arrived. He had shifted his weight so subtly, so efficiently, that Brad's kick cut through empty air and the momentum carried the younger man slightly off balance. It was like trying to hit smoke. Brad recovered quickly, his athletic ability and training allowing him to transition smoothly into a combination: jab, cross, front kick. All technically perfect, all executed with tournament-level precision, all completely ineffective. Dean moved like water around each strike, flowing around them without apparent effort or concern. He wasn't even counterattacking yet, just evading, making Brad chase him around the mat while expending energy on techniques that found no target. The confident smile was starting to fade from Brad's face. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He increased his speed and intensity, throwing strikes faster and harder, putting more power behind each technique. Still, nothing connected. Dean's movements remained minimal and efficient, almost lazy-looking to the untrained eye. But Brad couldn't touch him, couldn't even force him to break a sweat. Then, Dean moved offensively. It happened so fast that most of the students didn't see it clearly. One moment Dean was evading, flowing backward. The next moment he had closed the distance, swept Brad's lead leg with perfect timing, and controlled his descent so that the young champion landed flat on his back on the mat. Not injured, but completely controlled and helpless. "Point," the instructor called, his voice carrying a mixture of professional obligation and barely concealed amazement. Brad scrambled to his feet, his face flushed with exertion and growing embarrassment. That had to be luck. A fortunate accident. He was a tournament champion, a legitimate martial artist. This older guy had just gotten lucky with a basic technique. They reset their positions. Brad came in more aggressively this time, trying to use his superior youth and athleticism to overwhelm his opponent before any more lucky shots could land. He threw a complex combination that he'd used to win tournaments, hand strikes flowing seamlessly into kicks, designed to confuse and overwhelm opponents with its speed and complexity. Dean countered with a technique so simple it was almost insulting in its elegance. He sidestepped at precisely the right moment, caught Brad's extended arm in a gentle but unbreakable grip, and used the young man's own momentum to guide him past while applying just enough pressure to a nerve point that Brad's entire arm went momentarily numb and useless. "Point!" the instructor called again, his voice now carrying genuine respect. Brad was breathing hard now, both from physical exertion and from mounting frustration and disbelief. The dojo had gone completely silent, except for the sound of his heavy breathing. Everyone was watching this impossible scenario unfold. The cocky smile was completely gone from Brad's face, replaced by confusion, humiliation, and the first stirrings of real respect for his opponent. But he wasn't done. Champions didn't give up, especially not in front of their own classmates. He came in one final time, this time attempting to grapple, to use his size and strength advantages in close quarters where technique might matter less than raw physical power. It was exactly what Dean had been waiting for. In a movement that was more dance than combat, Dean redirected Brad's grabbing attempt, stepped through his guard with perfect footwork, and executed a flawless hip throw that deposited the young champion on the mat for the third and final time. The technique was so smooth, so effortless that it looked like Brad had simply decided to lie down. "Match," the instructor announced with finality. Dean immediately extended his hand to help Brad up, the gesture as natural and respectful as everything else he had done. The young man took it, still too shocked and confused to speak coherently. When Brad was back on his feet, Dean bowed to him with the same deep respect he had shown at the beginning of their encounter. Only then did Dean speak, his voice quiet enough that only Brad and the nearby students could hear clearly. "You have excellent technique," Dean said with genuine sincerity. "Your forms are textbook perfect and your conditioning is outstanding, but you're fighting with your ego instead of your mind, and that's not martial arts. That's just violence with better posture." Brad's mouth opened, but no words came out. He was staring at Dean's face, and recognition was starting to dawn despite his shock. Even without the sunglasses, even in simple workout clothes, there was something unmistakably familiar about those eyes, that voice, that calm confidence. One of the white belt students in the front row couldn't contain herself anymore. "Oh my God," she whispered, but in the silent dojo it carried clearly. "That's Dean Martin." The dojo erupted into excited chatter. Students started talking all at once, pointing, some approaching to get a closer look at one of America's most famous entertainers. Brad's face went from flushed red to completely white as the full reality of what had just happened crashed down on him like a physical weight. He had challenged Dean Martin, a legitimate black belt martial artist, to a fight and gotten completely dominated in front of everyone he trained with. Sensei Yamamoto chose that moment to emerge from his office, where he had been watching the entire encounter through his window. He walked onto the mat with measured steps, and immediately every student in the dojo bowed respectfully. Dean bowed as well, deeply and with genuine reverence for his teacher. "Mr. Martin," Sensei Yamamoto said with the slight smile of someone who had just witnessed exactly what he had hoped to witness. "I didn't know you were visiting us today." "I apologize for dropping in unannounced, Sensei," Dean replied with the formal respect he had always shown his instructor. "I just wanted to observe a regular class. I didn't mean to disrupt your students' training." "Disrupt?" Sensei Yamamoto looked at Brad, then back at Dean, his meaning clear to everyone present. "I think you have just provided a very valuable lesson for everyone here." He turned to address the entire class, his voice carrying the authority of decades of teaching. "This is Dean Martin. Some of you know him as an entertainer and performer. I know him as a dedicated martial artist who has trained seriously for over 8 years, who approaches this art with genuine humility and respect, and who understands that true mastery comes from discipline and wisdom, not from tournament trophies or public recognition." The words hit Brad like physical blows. Sensei Yamamoto wasn't even looking directly at him, but the message was clearly and pointedly directed his way. Dean spoke up, his voice carrying the same warmth and generosity that had made him beloved by millions. "Sensei Yamamoto, if I may, Brad here has genuine talent and excellent technique. His physical skills are outstanding, With the right mindset and continued guidance, he could be truly exceptional. Brad finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Mr. Martin, I'm so sorry. I didn't know who you were, and I was disrespectful and arrogant." Dean held up a hand, stopping him gently. "You were disrespectful, yes, but not because of who I am. You were disrespectful because you made assumptions about someone based purely on appearance and age. That's a dangerous habit in martial arts and in life." Dean picked up his sunglasses and baseball cap from the bench. "You know what the most important lesson in karate is? It's not the kicks or the punches or the fancy techniques you see in tournaments. It's understanding that you never stop being a student. The moment you think you've learned everything, the moment you stop respecting every person who walks into this dojo, that's the moment you stop growing as a martial artist and as a person." He turned back to Brad with genuine compassion. "You asked if age is just a number. It's not. Age is experience. Age is lessons learned through years of practice and failure and getting back up. Age is humility earned through understanding how much you still don't know. You're young and talented, and that's valuable, but add humility and respect to your skill, and you'll be unstoppable." Brad bowed deeply, lower and more sincerely than he had ever bowed before in his life. "Thank you, Sensei. I won't forget this lesson, and I won't waste it." Dean bowed in return with equal sincerity. "Good, because I'm going to ask Sensei Yamamoto about your progress. I want to hear that you've become not just a better fighter, but a better martial artist and a better man. There's an important difference." Years later, when Brad Morrison had become a respected instructor himself, he would keep a photograph on his dojo wall, a picture of himself and Dean Martin, both in training clothes, both bowing to each other with genuine mutual respect. Under the photo was a quote that Brad had written himself. "Never assume you know what someone is capable of by looking at them. True strength, like true character, often comes in the most unexpected packages." If this story of humility conquering arrogance inspired you, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button. Share this with anyone who needs a reminder that respect and humility are more powerful than any technique. Have you ever learned an important lesson by underestimating someone? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to ring that notification bell for more incredible stories about the hidden depths of entertainment's greatest legends.